Hi. So you're making a drive from halfway Oregon back to Portland, Oregon, and I wanted to tell you about some of the really cool geology that you're going to be driving through, particularly between halfway and Pendleton. There's something called exotic terrain, and you're driving through some really cool examples of exotic terrain, and that is defined as something that used to not be a part of the continent is now part of the continent. It has gotten accreted onto the continent. Imagine an island arc, kind of like the Aleutian Islands off of Alaska, and if that island arc got mushed onto North America, that's kind of what happened with the Wallowa terrain. The Wallowa Mountains used to be an island arc somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, and it got accreted onto North America through plate tectonics and subduction. You'll see a fault on the southwest edge of the valley that halfway is located in. The road actually parallels some of the fault as it gets out of halfway, and you actually see some kind of like step-looking things in the land in that southwestern part of the valley, and those are some faults. Once you get just past Richland, you get to see some ash kind of deposits. It looks kind of powdery a little bit, and that's actually some deposits from the John Day Formation. And the John Day Formation originated from the Crooked River caldera almost in central Oregon. If you know where Smith Rock is pretty much right at ground zero of the Crooked River caldera, and the ash that you're driving through just past Richland there is the easternmost extent of the ash from that big giant supervolcano. So that's pretty dramatic. After you get through that, you're going to get into this really cool canyon. It's called the Powder River Canyon. I think you drive through it for about 10 miles. And what's really neat about it is that those are the roots or the belly of that island arc that the Wallowa terrain is composed of. And it's some diorites and gabbro. And you're lucky to be driving through that to see it, because diorite and gabbro isn't normally on the surface of the planet. They usually stay much deeper down. After you get through that canyon and you head towards Baker City, to the west you see this ridge, and that ridge is called Elkhorn Ridge. That is yet another accreted terrain. That is known as the Baker terrain, and that one's really cool as well. It's not like the Wallowa terrain. It's not an island arc that got docked on. This is actually a subduction zone itself. I mean, there's an active subduction zone off of the Oregon coast. It's called the Cascadia subduction zone, and the Baker terrain is an old subduction zone that got just smushed onto the North American continent right there. So that's really kind of cool. So you get all kinds of interesting metamorphic rocks there from the intense squeezing and pressure of, two plates kind of squishing together there. To Baker City, you go north up towards La Grande on Highway 84, and you're basically driving along this great big valley, and faults actually dropped that big block of land downward. And so on one side you have the Wallowa terrain, on the other side you have the Blue Mountains. Those are higher than this whole block that you're driving up, and that's a down-dropped fault block. It's a graben. So you're driving up a big graben there. So once you get past La Grande, you're actually going to start climbing up out of that graben valley into the northeastern extent of the Blue Mountains, and you're driving over a bunch of flood basalt deposits. In fact, the flood basalts that you're seeing, you're actually going to see all the way through the beautiful, amazing Columbia River Gorge, almost all the way to Portland. And what's really interesting is that the source of these flood basalts are pretty much right where y'all are. It's kind of close to Idaho, close to the Wallowa Mountains, where all those accreted terrains came together. At some point, all these fissures opened in that area, and all of this basalt started flooding out. And a lot of those basalts went all the way from almost to Idaho, clear to the Pacific Ocean. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with water flood. Can you imagine floods of basalt? And they happened a bunch of times in Earth's history. There was a bunch of basalt that just flooded the landscape. I can't even imagine how inhospitable that must have been. So you're driving over some flood basalts that are covering that portion of the Blue Mountains, and they look very gentle and rolling and flat, because in fact they're just a bunch of flat layers of lava that cover the landscape. Then you're going to start dropping down off of the Blue Mountains, and it's this great big descent down towards the Pendleton area, and that drop down is actually caused by even more fault, dropping down this whole fault complex there. And you're going to get to some super flat land that was actually an ancient lake bed, and then you get back into the Pendleton area, and you're back in all of those flood basalt, and you're going to see all of those beautiful things all the way through the gorgeous gorge and almost all the way to lovely Portland. So I hope this enriches your drive a little bit, and geology rocks, and so do you.